What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an update of sorts about Lords of the Fallen, a Souls-like that released in the later half of last year, October to be specific, and at that time, and to this day, the game had a very mixed reception. Some people enjoyed it a great deal, others not so much, and if you watched my own review of this title, you might remember that while I enjoyed what it was trying to do, I agreed that it had more than its fair share of issues, and that I would suggest most people hold off and wait until they had a lot of those problems ironed out before jumping into it. And now, about 6 months later, it seems to have received a final updates of sorts via its patch 1.5. Now, I don't think they've ruled out future DLC or anything, so I don't know if this will literally be their final update, but nonetheless, since launch and now, they've released about 30 updates for this game total, changing and tweaking all sorts of things. This most recent patch added a bunch of modifiers for New Game Plus options if you want, which allows you to adjust all sorts of things, even some that were a point of contention up to this point. So basically, I just wanted to touch base on this particular game and talk about some of those changes that have been made since then and how it is these days. Now, right out of the gate, and you might have seen this on screen a little bit already, is that for me, the game definitely still stutters. One of this game's issues when it launched was a fair few performance problems, especially with the multiplayer, and many of its updates have been centered around fixing exactly those things. Though the efficacy of those fixes is a bit debatable, as I've seen a lot of people saying that they have no issues at all with the game now, and I admit I'm not really running into any bugs anymore, simply that the game itself stutters pretty heavily and there doesn't seem to be much I can really do to avoid it. So that's definitely still a thing, at least in part, though overall technically the game does seem to be in a better place. But now let's talk about some of the things that have changed over the last 6 months. So one thing they did right around the time I was actually reviewing this game was balancing the difficulty and nerfing ranged attackers. That would just be destroying you before you could even get to them, while also trying to fight off melee guys, especially when you were in the Umbral realm. And they did a lot to adjust those things. In particular, the New Game Plus cycles the game offered were originally much more stringent in that they would remove vestiges or places you could rest in all but a few places, but the patches made this a more gradual change, provided you don't use the modifiers, which we'll get to. But the gradual change was basically that over the course of a few New Game Plus cycles, the vestiges and where they were would slowly start to go down, as opposed to just suddenly being taken completely away. They also added the option to start what is called a New Game Plus 0, which is effectively restarting the game but keeping your current character. So enemies and things don't grow in strength, but rather you keep all of your progression. That one in particular was intended to help people 100% the game, which is interesting because this most recent update adds a bunch of more achievements for using the modifiers. Now, content-wise though, the game also saw a few updates, including a few new quest lines aimed at giving you new armor and sets. These were all themed around the game's major forces, Radiant, Infernal, and Umbral. And in addition to those new things, the boss weapon abilities also got improved. The bosses themselves saw additional move sets and AI added. And that's to say nothing of the 12 new spells that were added, and magic was already very good, so that's a surprising change to me. And even just flashy stuff like extra finishers. All of that, though, is to say nothing of the quality of life improvements that have been brought to the game, such as the ability to store items, which keeps you from piling up items in your inventory, which could get out of hand pretty quickly. They've done a lot of work in particular to remove that issue. They've also allowed for you to reset your appearance and even rebind controller keys. So over the course of the last few months, the game has made substantial strides in the right direction, but that brings us to the big feature from this latest patch, which is game modifiers. Basically, they took all of those things that people were concerned about in terms of the game's balancing, and they allow you to add those to a playthrough as a modifier of some sort. This includes things like affecting the enemy density of the title, as they had to reduce this because the enemy density on launch was just insane, and they pulled that back. But now, if you preferred the more option, you can turn that on. We also have options like random loot, randomized enemies, the vestige decay, that is to say removing the extra vestiges from the game like you would see in normal New Game Plus cycles, and then even more difficult things like Iron Man or Withered Healing. Dying in Iron Man mode resets the game's world progression but not your character. So you can sort of keep trying until you get it right and retain your player levels and things, I imagine, to ease some frustration for that one. But then the Withered Healing one is interesting as well, because this makes use of the game's withered mechanic. Some attacks will wither your health rather than take it away altogether. This turns a portion of your health bar white, and if you attack enemies at that time, you'll regain that health. Withered Healing causes your normal healing to instead become withered, meaning you have to attack to actually get the healing, which certainly makes for more interesting boss fights to say the least. Though I am a little curious after playing around with that one for myself how true to form that actually is, because when you go to upgrade your main healing item, it mentions not having any healing at first at level 1, but then the next level up causes you to gain 20% HP, so I think that might not necessarily be as extreme as it seems on the face of it. But the cool thing about these is that you can turn on as many or as little as you please, and you do so right when you roll up a new game. But I will say that if you're completely unaware, when you beat the game with its various endings, you'll typically unlock a sort of advanced class that puts you at the beginning of the game in a much better position than you would normally be, which is a lot of the footage you're seeing on screen. And I imagine that's going to make people playing through the game again with those stronger classes that they can now choose if they've beaten the game previously on top of these game modifiers is likely where you'll see the most of the benefit for the content of this particular stuff. So it's with that exact thing in mind that I'm going to be taking those advanced classes through the game with these modifiers to grab the achievements that they added to the title with this update. But to sort of pull all that together and wrap this video up, overall, I would say that Lords of the Fallen seems to be in a much better place now than it was at launch. They've added a lot of cool stuff to the game to help people enjoy and even perhaps play through the game multiple times. They've adjusted and responded to a lot of player feedback in regards to the launch and afterwards. But in spite of that, all of the issues are not entirely gone. While performance is much better, it also definitely still stutters, for me at least. And my PC is about as good as they get. On the consumer side of things anyways. So broad strokes, if you're interested in Lords of the Fallen, it is definitely better off now than it was at launch. But at the same time, if you didn't like what they had to offer initially, then I doubt this is going to change your mind on the matter. All in all, I would say that's pretty much everything for me. Mostly, I am happy to see that they put so much effort into sticking to what they said they were going to do, which is address all of these things and put out these patches. And while I simply don't think this game will ever be for everyone, as Souls-likes as a genre are very not for everyone by default, this one a little more so than usual. But I do think it's cool that they stuck with it, and I'm happy to see a lot of these changes personally. And if you've been wondering about this title, it's definitely in a better place than it was at launch. That is going to do it for this particular video, though. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.